Before I get too far into talking about the different styles of writing, I want to talk just a little bit about paragraphing in journalism. Paragraphing is an important concept that, there's an old... Well, I should start by saying this. One of my colleagues had done extensive research on the paragraph. Ends up the first dissertation ever written at the University of Chicago, which is a fairly prestigious college up in the Chicago area, the private school up there. And one of the very first doctoral dissertation written at that institution was actually about paragraphing. What is a paragraph? And people debate it, but journalists tend to have a very basic concept of paragraphing. They tend to be very, 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 very short in their paragraphing. You switch ideas, you switch paragraphs. You give a quote, you move on to a new paragraph. I mean, we don't have very many. So there's an old joke about journalism that, a paragraph is just a sentence that's indented. That every sentence is its own paragraph. And if you read a lot of news stories, you will find that a lot of times they are nothing more than a sentence or two. Part of the reason is it fits with the style of giving the news quick and easy. And you can jump from point to point to point. One paragraph. You got a little bit different point, just jump to a new paragraph. And so instead of trying to build all these paragraphs together and coming up with fancy transitions and building upon it, you just give lots of paragraphs. It also is easy to track. It gives you lots of places to stop and enter the story. And so paragraphing is a very big part of that. Now, with that said, the idea though is I think the key there is you're not needing to give tons of information. You're giving key facts. You're kind of changing ideas a little bit. You move on. You give a quote, that should be its own paragraph. And so the idea is you're kind of giving things in little chunks, and so lots of paragraphs is important. So that's something just sort of to begin with all this is to keep in mind that, don't write long paragraphs. One of the biggest comments I'll have on your first stories will be, need more paragraphs. Just be a real simple statement. Now, with that said, the inverted pyramid is one of the styles, and the inverted pyramid is probably the most famous style of news writing. It's basically, a pyramid is just a triangle, or it's a triangle. You have the base and then you have two sides, and so that's basically what a pyramid is. Let me see if I can just right here. Here's a pyramid, right? But all an inverted pyramid is it's turned upside down, right? So it's thus inverted, and so the idea of an inverted pyramid, that's basically all it is a triangle turned upside down. And the idea here is the base is what's going on and you kind of build towards the top. Well, the idea here is your base should be your lead. And you should build towards the top, which is, kind of, instead of building towards your point, or sort of building towards, and giving extraneous information, you start with what's most important, which is a strong foundation, the key information, the key facts, the key ideas, the most important information, and you work your way down to the bottom. Why did this style exist? Well, to begin with, it was invented during the 1800s with the invention of the telegraph. The telegraph was the first chance where instead of having a mail or Pony Express, which Pony Express was only around for a few months, or maybe a year or year and a half, but they began to string these telegraph lines. And so instead of having to wait for the next wagon train or to come in, or wagon trail to come in, come in with news from the east, or a ship to come in with news from Europe, you could simply send it via this wire and it could speed across the country. Well, the problem is one telegraph person may, in maybe Columbus, Ohio, might be communicating with somebody in St. Louis, and then St. Louis would, dispatch it on further, and somebody else would dispatch it. It may go through several rounds. But the other problem is there's basically one line. You have information. People don't have time to get all of it. One of the guys gets tired and goes, okay, that's enough. He quits listening and he shuts off his end. There is a limit to how long these telegraph, messages could be. There's all Morse code. Somebody has to sit there and write it out. The other problem is you get ice storms and power lines break here in the Midwest in modern times. It takes a while. Same thing happened back then. It would take a while to get a crew out to the middle of nowhere to fix it. And so, the telegraph was not always the optimal system. Sometimes it would break. Sometimes it would give out. But so what happened is in order to give the key information, they created this inverted pyramid. They realized that sometimes the message would be cut short for whatever reason, whether it be personal, whether it be a physical problem, whether it be just, time, whatever the element is, things got cut off. And so what the inverted pyramid did was it began by saying, what we're going to do is, instead of giving, the entire story in sort of a narrative format or some other format, we're going to start off with the most important information right up there at the top. Right at the top, we're going to give you what happened, the basic news lead. And then we're going to just chunk in the information, arranging every paragraph, every piece of information in order of its importance. Least important information at the end, right? That way, you go along and it gets less and less and less and less important. And that way, if the cable breaks at, paragraph 7 or paragraph 12, you've got the 7 to 12 most important paragraphs. Whereas if you get, if you start off and you give, the most important information in graph 12, and it breaks at paragraph 7, they don't get the most important information. They get some other information. And so you are basically right. You want to elaborate on a point? Well, if you have another important fact, then, then you maybe want to say that. You might want to have a lead where, earthquake strikes California, at least 23 dead. Further hampering the problem, their dam has been weakened. Right? And so instead of talking about what happened with the earthquake and how the people were killed and everything, that's important, but it's not as important as the fact the dam's may break, or the fact that, this or that. And so you're basically just building it. And so you kind of jump around from fact to fact, breaking it down in order of importance. And that's an important style. While we don't necessarily have that, it is an important style for another reason, which is that most of you will be writing, and people have a very short attention span. And people will stop reading all the way through it. And so the idea is you want to give them the most important information. Very few people read a newspaper, read an article online or in the web, and read the entire thing. They tend to jump and read it straight down, and then start jumping along as they find less and less stuff interesting. And they quit reading whenever they find it uninteresting at all. Actually, with online writing, and this is important for some of you who want to do blogging or things, is people tend to skim those. They start and they read the first few graphs, and then as they begin to lose interest, they'll skim down through it. And so bullets and boldening key ideas helps to do it. But the inverted pyramid basically recognizes that people will quit reading. And so the idea here is to take your information and organize it in the way from most important to least important, all the way down. The next one is what they call hourglass style, or the martini glass. There's different names for it, but make that a little bit bigger, I suppose. Or maybe I'll just completely mess it up. Sorry about that. What in the world? There we go. Sorry about that. I was going to try to do it without having the next thing. The martini glass style. Essentially what this does is it begins with a basic news pyramid, but it recognizes that, sometimes you can kind of go with important fact, but sometimes it's important just to kind of give a little bit of a chronology or other things. Typically you would write things chronologically, or you would write things in a format like if you were writing and telling people what all you did on your vacation. But an hourglass style would start with sort of the most important information, break it down in level of importance, and then go back and tell you the history. So maybe, this might be a good example. I think I just sort of said was the vacation. Maybe your friends say, how was your vacation? You say, oh, it was great. We went to the Bahamas. The weather was beautiful every day. We went to the beach every day. I got a sunburn, and you kind of just give them the highlights. And then maybe, you'd say, oh, well, on day 1 we did this, day 2 we did that, day 3, then you go through a chronology. And so that, the idea there is you start off with the most important, and then if people are still interested, they'll go through the chronology. And then you end with what's called a kicker. A kicker is maybe just going back to some important or fun or something that's going to kind of leave people going, okay, I read through this chronology, I'm not just going to end with it, and you give them back some sort of kicker. And there are various examples. Probably the most easy to access example would be obituaries of famous people. For example, when Robin Williams died, maybe you would start off with, Robin Williams committing suicide and, the fact that he'd won, all these awards, and you'd hit some of his main shows, the one he's best known for, and all this, and you would kind of work your way down in a pyramid. But then at some point you would stop and say, okay, I've given a lot of the most important information. Now I'm going to run through his career. I'm going to say, he was born to parents who did this, and he married this woman, and he starred in these films, and you kind of just run through his entire life history then. And that's sort of the hourglass style. And then then maybe at the end, you end with a kicker, which maybe comes back to saying how much Robin Williams was an influence on some actor or some famous person's quote. You kind of end with something a little more meaty than just, going through their life. And that kind of wraps it up for the readers. And so that's the hourglass or martini glass style. The idea is the reason you say hourglass is it's an inverted pyramid at the top, and then you kind of have that middle chute, and then you have kind of widening out that kicker part where you're kind of building back out to something important or, to say about them. Martini glass, I think that's a nice style because if you think about a martini glass, it's got a big triangle at the bottom. It's got a long stem of chronology, and then it's got just a little kicker out at the bottom. And I think that probably is a better example than an hourglass, but hourglass tends to be the focal name of it. And finally, the other style is what we call the focus style. The idea here is, or sometimes they call it a kebab. Well, this one's one that starts with like an anecdotal lead. We talk about anecdotal or narrative leads. And so it starts off telling you about somebody, and then it gives that nut graph. And then what it does is it sort of gives you that basic news story in that nut graph. That at this point it begins to actually tell you everything that's going on. It's telling you about, all the different facts. Now, unlike a news pyramid, it doesn't have to, after the nut graph, actually develop everything from most important to least important. It can kind of jump around and, it doesn't have to be quite the same style. It can kind of go through, a set of chronologies and facts and information, then kind of move on to another one, transition into another one, then transition into another, then transition into yet another one. But that's sort of the way. But then the end, it always ends with a narrative. You can have narratives throughout, but the key is the best way to do these types, and this would be kind of the kind of style you might do with your feature writing, is you want to come back to your narrative or your person. If you started off talking about Joe Smith and how he was affected by Obamacare, or you start off with, Jill Johnson and her problems with finding a job or trying to live on minimum wage, or you start off with so-and-so's experiences after the tornado, and then you talk about, the nut graph is, the tornado came through and destroyed 15,000 homes, and you give all the facts and information. The thing is a nice way to summarize is to come back to that person you led with and finish out their story. That way you're not just giving their whole story right up front. Maybe you come back and you say, and today she's there and she's continuing to struggle, but she sees hope. And so it kind of brings it all back together. It ties it back around to that person. And so that would be the other style. Now, how you fold out this information will vary, but the key is I talked a little bit about paragraphing, but transition is important. The ability to use some keywords and bring us through it. Most of what we will do in this class will be more of a pyramid style or a very basic format. But the idea here is you can't just write everything like a paper. Your idea is you want to start off with most important and work your way down. If you're going to vary from that, you might want to start with that and then give a chronology or more of that hourglass or that martini glass form. But the other option is the focus style or kebab style. And with the focus or kebab style, the idea there is you are you're kind of starting off with a person and then giving the meat being hung like on a kebab stick. You know, it's meat with potatoes and other things mixed in.